Believe it or not, goodbye Salesforce and Adobe, because AI will end enterprise software. I'm Omar Oakes.
And I'm Hamish Nicklin.
And this is Believe It or Not, a podcast where two people who spent their careers inside media and advertising are on opposite sides of the AI debate, and we're going to find out whether the biggest claims actually hold up. Now, this is the sixth and final episode of our limited run of episodes with the media leader, and we're very grateful to them for hosting us, for giving us a platform. But of course, there's always a lot to talk about when it comes to AI and the new outrageous and thought-provoking and otherwise interesting claims being made all the time. So, if you like what we're doing, and or if you have ideas for how we should tackle these subjects in future, please send us an email either to myself, which is omar@oomph.com, or Hamish, who's at hamish@goagentflow.com. And before we get stuck into this grand claim, Hamish, let me tell you about something that crossed my inbox this week that I can't stop thinking about. BuzzFeed, you remember BuzzFeed?
I do. Listicles.
Yeah, they were the future ones, weren't they? Now trading at roughly the market cap of a reasonably successful dental practice, I suppose. Have you seen it's been recently sold to Byron Allen, the comedian?
No.
No, I've not heard of Byron Allen myself, but it's sold for about $120 million. And in the small print, it actually says that Allen only put up $20 million in actual cash, and the rest is a note secured only by the shares he just bought, which means he could theoretically just walk away if things don't go well. But here's the part I love and why it's relevant for AI. So Jonah Peretti, the founder, the man who genuinely believed that native advertising and listicles, as you say, were going to save journalism, he gave up his super voting shares and he gave up to the CEO title of BuzzFeed, but he's now staying on as president, and I quote, president of BuzzFeed AI, whatever that is.
Wow, I do wonder what that is. I hope that's not some sort of like, let's just go and create fake content, mad stuff. Well, we'll see what happens. We'll see. But yeah, God, I'd forgotten all about BuzzFeed. I remember when I was at Huffington Post, it was the big thing we were worried about, constantly competing against them and their listicles and all that stuff while we were trying to genuinely do proper journalism. But yeah, funny enough, when I got to The Guardian, didn't worry so much about BuzzFeed.
How was it working at the Huffington Post? We've not talked about your time there.
It was cool, man. It was great. I'll never forget my interview with Arianna Huffington. She came in late. The tech didn't work. And she just said, "Everybody loves you, darling." And I was like, oh, okay, this is going to be a good interview then. And that was literally it. 5 minutes later, interview done. And yeah, lovely time. I mean, it was obviously part of AOL. So it was one of the strands to the culture and code. I think that was the pitch that we went out with, AOL being the home of culture and code. It was a great proposition. Didn't always live up to it though, but there we go.
Yeah, I actually I applied myself once years and years ago for a job at the Huffington Post when I was in news, and I remember having an interview at wherever their office was in central London back then. I don't even remember.
It's just off Tottenham Court Road.
I suppose it would have been. I don't remember. And I remember I didn't get past this round of interview, but they said, every hire speaks to Arianna at the end, and it seemed like this grand kind of final boss mode. So it's interesting to hear that.
Cool.
Funny little business, but that's for a different show. But yeah. I suppose when a business model collapses and you don't know what to do, you put AI next to your job title and hope nobody notices.
Hey, isn't that? That's what I've done. I'm building a career on that, my friend. Okay, so look, what have I seen? Getting back to AI. So I found something it's a month or two old now, and it's a bit weird, I suppose, but it is a bit more serious than my normal ones. NBC did a poll a few months ago asking Americans how they felt about AI, and AI got a net favorability of -20, which, if like me, you spend time on LinkedIn, you would not be surprised by. Everyone seems to hate AI everywhere you go, apart from a few diehards like me. But for comparison, in the same poll, ICE, that sort of militarized police force that's killing Americans, it got -18. Donald Trump got minus 12. So Trump beats AI by 8 points. ICE beats AI by 2. And I suppose the thing that I found slightly weird was in the same survey, they found that well over half of Americans use ChatGPT every single week, despite absolutely hating it. So I think there's themes in there that we will need to come back to sometime, maybe in this episode and certainly in future episodes, because there's something funny going on there. And I've got a lot of views as to why.
Yeah, I suppose off the top of my head, the hypothesis would be on a very personal level, using a ChatGPT chatbot, you kind of, this is fun, and you anthropomorphize it, and it seems like your little friend helping you. Whereas if somebody in a poll is asking you about AI, your mind opens up to the doom and gloom about AI taking everyone's job and
I think that's
Terminator.
I think it's the taking the job. It's killing us all if they ever get super intelligence. It's the damage it's doing to the environment. It's all those claims that are being made, some of which are valid, some of which are nonsense, as we've talked about in other episodes. But I think all of that narrative is what's causing that hatred, and because it does feel like hatred. It's really strange. But anyway, there we are. That's what I found this week.
Poor AI. Don't hate. Remember, it's not a person. It's just technology. But Hamish, let's get into the claim of this week's episode. If I told you that two of the most valuable software companies on the planet, companies that between them are embedded inside virtually every large business on earth, had both lost a third of their market value this year, what would you think?
I think I'm not surprised, and I would tell you all about why. And why I think that's going to continue to happen. And that valuation is, they're going to have a fight on their hands to ever get back to the heady days that they were at.
Clearly, there's something up with their businesses, and the market sees that. So, of course, I'm talking about Salesforce and Adobe. At the time of recording, both down roughly a third year to date. There's another company, ServiceNow, which listeners may or may not have heard of, which is basically the connective tissue of how large businesses manage their own operations, also down by 40%. And it's not because their revenues have fallen off a cliff. Salesforce actually reported strong numbers. The market, it looks like it's pricing in something that it believes it's coming. And we're going to talk about today whether that's right. So, Hamish, introduce the claim.
All right, so the claim is that AI will end enterprise software. So listen, strap in, Buttercup. This is a huge one because that's a bold claim and it needs a big story, okay? I think this is probably the biggest claim that we've made this series, actually. So look, I think we need to give some context. You've given some there, but let me add some extra stuff to it. So in the last few months, $2 trillion has been wiped off the value of SaaS stocks. $2 trillion. Some people are calling it SaaSmageddon. Some are calling it SaaSpocalypse, depending on which word you find easier to say. So for me, that's SaaSmageddon. Of course, that number of 2 trillion is contested. I've seen it range anywhere from 280 billion through to 2 trillion. But come on, man, even if it's off by half, that's $1 trillion of value wiped off an entire industry. And the reality is, in my perspective, the lazy take on this is that Wall Street is just acting as a herd. They're suffering from an attack of the jitters since they don't really know at this stage how to price AI's impact on business. And look, there's some truth to that, I suppose, but $2 trillion in 6 months for the sorts of businesses that are still bringing in the revenues that they always did. That's not herd behavior, Omar. That's definitely something specific being baked into their price. And so to understand that, I think we do need to start with SaaS itself and do a bit of a SaaS explainer, or as my portmanteaus of a wife would say, a SaaS-plainer. Do you like that? Can I never do that again?
Is that because she's a sassy lady?
Okay, there we go.
But before you do that, so, okay, it's worth flagging out front. So I guess we're having two claims bundled into this today. So they're related, but I guess they're not quite the same. One is that AI agents are going to eat the core functions of enterprise software. So your CRM, your creative suites, workflow tools, things like that. The other is that ordinary, non-technical people can build their own software solutions from scratch. And that stop me if I'm wrong, but that's essentially what you were going to say. That's going to change the whole logic of why enterprise SaaS exists in the first place.
Yes, I think the second order that you've talked about there in terms of people can vibe code their own SaaS is definitely one of the factors, one of the key contributing factors to why AI is going to eat SaaS, but I don't think it's the only one, right? And I think that as we get into this, we'll see that there are different scales of enterprise where that's going to be more true than others, but let's get into that later. But yes, you're right. There's two claims. Yeah.
Okay.
So let's just understand more about SaaS and the model, because I think we need to understand that to understand why AI, either vibe coded or in other ways, is going to eat SaaS's lunch, right? So SaaS, for those who don't live and breathe this stuff, software as a service, it's the model that's basically built some of the biggest tech empires in the world. Salesforce, 40 billion revenue, Adobe, ServiceNow, you mentioned, Workday, Altacian, properly massive businesses that have all been built on the same idea of per seat licensing. So basically what they say is you pay us per user, per month, every month, forever, and we host the software, we maintain it, we update it, we secure it. It's a genius model of predictable recurring revenue that scales with customers and essentially locks them in via integrations and, Omar, this is going to be key, the cost of exiting. It's essentially the investor's holy grail that everyone wangs on about, that predictable recurring revenue that scales and locks people in. So what are you actually paying for? Well, you're not, to what lots of people think, you're not paying for the database, right? The place where your data and your company information all sits, because databases are cheap, right? You can host petabytes of data on Azure or GCP or AWS for actually not very much. So what you're paying for is that front end, the GUI. There are probably a few things, actually. The first one is the GUI. The mobile apps, the workflow engines, the report building tools, the admin tools, the marketplace of partner apps, all of that stuff, all of which, and this is going to become important, assume that humans are clicking buttons in a browser, and all of which Salesforce maintains with guaranteed near 100% uptime for everyone forever.
Yeah, and it's incredibly seductive. I mean, so in my small kind of one-person business right now, I basically run my whole business off of Notion, which is just like, as you say, a database, pages linking to each other, and the thing is, they hook you in, and I can't imagine using something different now. And this is the thing when you talk about GUI, a user interface. Once you just want to rock and roll with your business, you don't want to faff around with anything else.
That's exactly that. So that's part of the lock-in, both in terms of technical lock-in, but also user behavior lock-in, right? So, and then what you're paying for is the moat that sits around that front end, the pre-built integrations to other systems. So Notion will sit and connect with other connections, right? And as your business grows, it will connect to other things like, well, maybe not Notion, but Salesforce, for example, will feed into all of your finance systems, your booking and billing systems, your marketing, your resource management tools, and so on, right? But you've also got, and this stuff's really important, the audit trail, the compliance frameworks. And of course, there's the classic, nobody gets fired for buying Salesforce, right? There's that insurance value or Notion or any of these famous SaaS tools. Now, look, none of that is nothing. All of that has value. It's a 25-year moat that's been brilliantly built up and brilliantly defended. And as I said, it has real value until recently. Right? And until recently, that was an unassailable position. The cost of leaving Salesforce or some of these other places was so much higher than the cost of staying that basically no one ever left. That was the model. And at least for SaaS companies, it had been working brilliantly. But as you mentioned, something funny went on earlier this year in 2026, because without warning, literally without warning, the wheels just fell off. Just think of the stock numbers that you talked about. Salesforce down 30%, Adobe down 20 odd, and I've got a list here that I could reel off, but I won't, because it's just a list of B2B brands that most people have never heard of.
Yeah, it's a market thing that's happening. It's not just particular companies, something going wrong. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And so all of these SaaS companies, they're scrambling, right? Because they can see something's coming. In the last 18 months, Salesforce has done a few things. First, they built Agentforce, which is their own AI agent platform. They want to basically be the AI layer for your CRM. So they've got the GUI, right? But now they want to be the AI layer. So they've built their own agents and agent force. And the pricing of this is where it gets interesting, right? Agent force is about, as always, with all of these SaaS companies, trying to get my head around how they commercialize it. It's opaque and it's complicated, but broadly, a cheap version of this is Agent Force is about $125 per user on top of your existing Salesforce license. So you've got your per seat fee for humans and now a per seat fee for your AI agents that they've built, right? So second, on top of Agent
people
Force,
buying that? Who's buying that?
yeah, a lot of people I'm talking to are buying it because they're like, do you know what? I don't want to build my agents. You can build it. I'll just access your agent force. They all sound as Salesforce really do. They've got slick sales kit and people go and buy it. And then they spend months and months and months trying to figure out how to install it because it is a very complicated beast to install. They do not make it easy. So guess what? Consultants can come along and charge small fortunes to install it, which is fine. That's a business model. That's an ecosystem. That's part of why SaaS, the ecosystem is built the way it is because it's sort of self-maintaining with all of the different bits that feed into each other, right? So, so that's what people are buying, and they really do seem to be buying it. So secondly, and this is the bit they probably don't tell you too much about, they charge per agent action. So on top of that $125 a month. So there's about 10 cents per action, which might not sound much, but an action is if an agent refuses a record, that's an action. If they update a record, another action. If they send an email, that's another action. It's just toll after toll after toll. And those 10 cents very quickly add up, right? Which is, I suppose, similar to the way API credits work, but it's not that expensive. Third, and this is the one I get excited about, is they've launched their own MCP server. Now, quick explainer, MCP explainer. I'll stop. It stands for Model Context Protocol. And I always get told off from my business partner when I simplify the definition like this, but I'm going to do it anyway because he's not here. It's basically an API for agents. So a universal connector that lets agents across any database or system access it directly, no matter who built it, right? So Salesforce launched theirs late 2025 in beta, and I think they just put it out in general availability early this year. Now, pricing for that is still TBD, but you know it won't be free. To access it, it probably won't be free. They're bound to start charging for either access or use. And remember, they control it because they built it. And that matters because if they control their MCP, it's not just about the charging for access. They control what your agent can actually do. So what it can read, what it can write, what it can update, what it can delete. Just like all APIs, in the olden school, APIs have limits to what you can do with an API. It's all fine in theory because you don't want a rogue agent wiping out your customer database like we've heard has happened in recent weeks. But, ultimately it's your data and Salesforce will be telling you which bits. And I'm going on about Salesforce. It's not really fair. It's basically all SaaS companies are going to be doing this, right? I'm just using Salesforce as a for example. So please don't come after me, Salesforce. I'm just a one-man band. I'm giving my perspective on where you're likely to go with your MCPs. But they're basically telling you which bits are your own agents, which bits you're allowed to touch and what they can do. And, you bet that it will be far less limited what you can do via MCP than you can do with Agentforce agents. So you've basically got 4 tolls potentially coming instead of 1. Per seat for humans, per seat for Agentforce, per action for their Agentforce agents, and then per call agent or access for the MCP server. And every single one of those tolls is essentially pay us to access your own data. Now, customers have always tolerated the first toll because the GUI was doing so much heavy lifting and it felt like really justified. But 4 on your own data, again, I'm extrapolating there will be a 4th, so let's just say what we know today. 3 to access your own data, with Salesforce controlling so much of it, I don't know. This doesn't feel like a company that's simply evolving quickly. To me, it feels more like a company that's genuinely preparing to face into a massive storm. The question has to be, and we're alluded to it already, and obviously it's the point of the podcast, what storm are they protecting themselves from, Omar? And you've guessed it, my skeptical AI friend, it's AI.
So let me understand what's going on here. So because they don't want everyone to just start going off and using to replace their software solutions with their own agents that they're creating in Claude or wherever, they're having to build these agentic things within their existing user interfaces. But the way in which they're having to bolt on things is turning out to be incredibly expensive for the user. So it's not sustainable. Is that essentially what you're saying?
I mean, that is what I'm saying. And I think that's the strategy. I think that's how it's going to play out, yeah.
So what is actually happening? What are people doing using Claude, OpenAI, ChatGPT? What are they actually doing that is the alternative that could be cheaper and more efficient?
I said that there was a storm coming. That storm has a date and a name, right? And it hit earlier this year. The date was the 12th of January. And it was the date when Anthropic launched Claude Cowork. Now, very briefly, for those who aren't Claude fanboys and girls, what Cowork is, it's essentially a desktop AI application that you get when you pay for Claude, right? So you don't get it with the free version. And so what this means is instead of just chatting with Claude in your browser, like we do with, the other chatbots, Cowork lives on your laptop and it can do things like it can open your files, it can access your systems and software via MCPs, okay? And it can plan and execute multi-step workflows for you. So it's not a chatbot. It's a very sophisticated agentic workflow, right? So the thing that sort of sits between a chatbot and an agent is an agentic workflow because you still need the human in the loop with Cowork. You're working together, hence Cowork. In short, and with relevance to the SaaS chat, it's an application that does the kind of things human used to need the SaaS GUI for, okay? And actually, I built Jarvis, my own chief of staff, on the January the 11th, the day before Cowork launched. And so I felt this launch personally because Cowork basically replicated what I'd spent weeks building. And so while I was a bit gutted, but also validated that I built something that Anthropic had decided to replicate, the market, at that point, it just shrugged. Because like me, they missed the real killer impact of what had just been launched. That didn't come until 18 days later, right? So now we fast forward to the 30th of Jan, Omar, when Anthropic shift what they call plugins for Cowork. A plugin is basically a wrapper that turns Cowork from a generalist into a specialist, right? It turns it from being just some very bright, very capable dude that's sitting next to you to someone who really understands what you and your business does, because it bundles together a few things. A skill, which is basically a markdown file that teaches Claude how to do something specific. A slash command, which triggers those skills. Connectors to other tools, so basically the MCPs, and sub-agents that can go off and do little work in the background to save your context window, right, and make the memory work. So basically, you build and install, for example, a pitch responder plugin, and suddenly Cowork knows how to respond to briefs and to pitch like you. Okay, it's incredibly powerful, and it's something that most people don't understand.
Well, so talk a bit more in detail about how something like that works, a pitch responder plugin. How does that work?
Yeah, so what you would do if you were building one of those, a plugin. So remember, a plugin is a wrapper of all of these other little gadgets that exist within Cowork. And so it could be a skill where it's a markdown file, which to people who don't understand what a markdown file is, basically a Word document for computers. They don't like reading Word documents. They find it hard to read. Markdown files are really easy for them. And suddenly you're going to see them everywhere because AI likes to read them. And it's basically a markdown file which has a set of instructions. So the way I always explain to people what a skill is, it's like thinking if there's a set of processes that you typically go through and that you can codify, put them in a skill and get Claude to read that skill and enact the skill so that it can guide you through a process or do it for you. All right, so I have my tone of voice skill. I have my YouTube prep script skill, all of which we've talked about in previous podcasts, right? So that's a skill that exists in one of these things. And it might be, this is the process that we go through when we do a pitch, right? We receive the brief, we go off and gather insights, and it has detailed stuff. It might be that there's another skill which is your tone of voice, your brand tone of voice, which is in there so that it knows how you should respond. It could be that it also, via connectors, connects up to previous examples of brilliant pitches that you've done. It might be that you connect it up to some other tools which go off, sub-agents, which go off and do research for you. right, based on the brief, right? So it's a plugin that wraps in all sorts of other tools that just exists in Cowork. So that when you get your brief, you open up your plugin and you just call it and say, let's get to work. And it knows which one of those tools to pull in based on the instructions that you've given it and how it wants to operate. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And so because it lives within your computer, and you can so I've seen it, you can designate a folder where it just lives in, so it's not crawling all around your computer and looking at holiday pictures and all the rest of it. Because now you can use an AI like Claude just to do things on your computer, you're like, well, I'll just have this constantly running in the background, so because I don't have to prompt it all the time. And you really began to see how people were starting to build their own software solutions. For me personally, it does feel like overkill. It's quite interesting to hear about that particular pitch responder skill that you described. But the thing is, it just seems incredibly expensive. So for someone like me who's not going to use the whatever highest level enterprise account that Claude offers, it just seems incredibly expensive in terms of burning through tokens.
No, you get it for your 20 quid. If you paid the 20 quid a month, you still get Cowork, which means you still get plugins. And you don't pay for the tokens it uses. It's just part of your monthly fee. Now, you might hit your limit a bit earlier, but I doubt it unless you're hammering the thing all the time. And if you're hammering it all the time, then it's worth paying a bit more to extend your access to tokens, right? So I don't think it's that expensive. And I think that's the point. I think that's why the market tumbled, because currently, right, and this is one for second order impacts maybe later, who knows where Claude and Anthropic are going to go with their pricing. But right now, it's phenomenally good value. And the thing that did it, so I've given you there an example that hopefully resonates with everybody on the call, because we work in media and advertising or in sales. So responding to pitches is what we do all the time. But the thing that really kicked all of this off was when Claude released a legal plugin. All right. So the legal plugin, as I said, was the one that mattered, because the legal plugin, as I said, is essentially just a folder of markdown files, plain text files that machines read more easily than Word, like I said, with a bunch of instructions and some very clever prompts. And they open sourced it and they put it on GitHub. So they said, look, Anthropic has just launched a legal plugin. We're going to give it away to everybody for free. That's all they did. Right? 3 days later, 3rd of February 2026, the market figured out the implications and it went mental. That's when SaaSmageddon, baby, that's when it happened, the early February, because within 24 hours, stocks were crashing. Legal stocks or legal tech stocks were going through the floor because a folder of free markdown files on GitHub was up against a multi-billion-pound legal tech business. And the market, it clocked it. What the market saw was this. Anthropic had just stopped being the brain that the SaaS could plug into. Right? That's all we all thought. Anthropic and OpenAI and all of these things, they were just a brain that you could plug into. And instead, it became the application layer that competes with SaaS directly. The three pieces that snap together here, Cowork, right? The surface, if you like, the application that exists within Claude and Anthropic. Artifacts, which can maybe, these can be things including live dashboards and tools that appear inside your chat window. It could just be a markdown file. An artifact, there are loads of different things that an artifact could be, but it's important here. Let's focus on one of them, which could be, a live dashboard of tools that appear inside your chat window. And the third thing that matters is the MCP, that open protocol that allows any AI agent to hit any database directly. So three things: the Cowork, the surface, the MCP, the connector with the database, and then artifacts, which is this ability to express that data in any format that you like, right? If you put them together, this is what you get. You end up going something like this. You say, Claude, show me my Q3 deals by region as a heat map, right? The MCP pulls live data from wherever it sits, which could be Salesforce, it could be some Postgres database that you've got, whatever. An artifact appears in your chat, a live dashboard. If you don't like it, do you know what? I fancy that being a bar chart and make it my Q4 forecast. If the data's there, which it should be in your database, 30 seconds later, you've got a different dashboard. Anthropic launched live artifacts only a few weeks ago, right? In April. They actually refresh with real data every time you open them. If you need it more permanently, so you don't want to sit in your chat because that's a bit of a pain in the ass, then guess what you do? If you want it because you've got a meeting, you're a sales director and you want all of your team to see this, you basically take the code, which is what an artifact is. Basically just, in this instance, it would be just some HTML code, and you host it in a SharePoint or in a Google Drive, and you just give everyone access to it, right? Same MCP feeding it. It's cheap and it's yours. Now, listen, Omar, if you've ever worked with Salesforce, you'll know that the amount of time it takes to get a bespoke dashboard created it's madness. And it's just so annoying. That story I've just told you is technically real today, depending on, of course, on Salesforce and what access they're giving your MCP. But you could do that. And if you don't use Salesforce as your database, but you have your own, some form of Postgres database, or like me and my tiny little business, I use Superbase, which is, is more than just a database, but it's where everything I have sits. I just plug the whole thing into there, and there it is, sitting, thanks to Claude Cowork, MCPs and artifacts, my own basically version of what the Salesforce GUI does. Think about it. The entire Salesforce front end exists to answer the sort of questions that I've just said you could ask Claude. So why would you log in? Let's be really honest about why Anthropic did this. It's not just because they're being nice. They've raised tens and tens of billions of dollars. They've got an IPO to justify. They cannot just keep selling tokens to developers and, licenses and subscriptions to the likes of you and me, right? That application layer is where the real money lives. And the real money currently sits in the bank accounts of Salesforce, Adobe, Thomson Reuters, and Anthropic. They want it. Not only that, they need it. It's dog eat dog, bro. I mean, this is what's happening. And this is why I'm really interested to see where this fight is going to take us, right? Cowork launched in February. Live Artifacts launched in April. Just imagine where this is going to go.
Yeah. And it's really a story of how Anthropic has overtaken OpenAI in terms of being the number one frontier AI company, in that because it's really leaned into enterprise solutions as opposed to general consumer applications. And now OpenAI has gone big into creating an ad product. It just seems to be very similar to Meta in terms of the way it's developing as a company. But
you're saying, hang on, you're saying Anthropic's like Meta?
No, OpenAI because they've not been able to show the potential of exactly what you're saying in terms of potentially replacing a behemoth like a Salesforce or an Adobe in terms of what you can actually get your business to do. So instead they're going down this kind of mine attention,
exactly
2010s Google, Facebook strategy. So that's really, so it's fascinating for me because this is really the story behind the story. It's not everything we've been talking about and had a lot of fun kind of talking about the claims of AI revolutionizing media planning. We kind of had a mixed verdict on that, and AI taking white collar jobs that we both were very dismissive of. That's kind of all the theater of what's happening, and kind of you were saying before about why people hate AI. It's all because of that. But what you're talking about now in this episode is really the story behind the story about where that value is actually coming from, and it definitely is on the enterprise side. What's to push back on this though, because if anyone listening to this is in a big organization and you don't choose whether you're using, if you're a CRM, you're using Salesforce or HubSpot or whatever, you're just kind of given the tools available to you and you get on with it, right? It seems to me like there's going to be pretty hard limits in terms of what an Anthropic can really expect demand to be like from the market in terms of, so for someone like you and potentially someone even like me, but I'm not a practitioner like you are, but I play around with this stuff in order to see, I can do that in terms of bespoke dashboards and manipulating the data that you have. I've done a bit of that, but in terms of just normal people working in business, how much are they actually going to be potentially vibe coding or even asking someone at their company, can you do this for me? I just, how realistic is that?
I think it's going to become more and more realistic as more and more people play with the tools and understand it. Okay, so there's a couple of different angles here. One is, think about Salesforce. And I'm going on about it because I do think it's a really interesting use case here. 20 years ago, when they were competing with all the sort of on-premises databases and they wanted to move to the cloud, they had to have a huge sales team that went out there explaining to people the narrative of what cloud was versus on-prem and why it was safe and why it was faster and why it was better and why it was cheaper and why moving to Salesforce was the future. And they couldn't cope, right? It was too big. There was too much demand for them. So what they did was they created an ecosystem of systems integrators, right? People, I suppose, like Merkel back in the day, who said to companies, don't worry about it. We will implement your Salesforce solution. And to answer your question here, Omar, we'll show you how to use it. We'll set you up. We'll build you the bespoke interfaces. We'll do a lot of the heavy lifting for you. And Anthropic have already started doing this. They've set up a big partner program. They've put, $100 million into a partner program to basically copy the Salesforce approach of 20 years ago. And they've poached a load of the original Salesforce folks who set that program up. So what they're going to do is they're going to create an ecosystem of people, which is what I want to do. Right? I want to take my agent flow business into this space because I genuinely believe if you know enough about how AI works, you can really help businesses embrace this approach. You will get these systems integrators, probably people who started like Merkel and a lot of these others who started off as Salesforce systems integrators, pivoting their businesses to be Anthropic or OpenAI or, Airtable. There's like another bunch of people who are trying to do what Claude and Anthropic are doing to help people put this new layer on top. And so that they teach people how to do it. Right? Because it's not that difficult. I mean, I've built loads of my own stuff and I know I'm more of a practitioner than most. So I live by the sea. I live 5 minutes walk from the beach, which is far enough away to be pissed off to find that when you get to the beach, it's too high a tide to walk your dog on, right? And despite always trying to read the tide tables that you can find online, they're really complicated because where I live, it's in the Solent, so you've got double high tides, right? So you've not just got 2 high tides a day. Each one has a double high tide. And I never really know what 1 meter and 4 meter means. Like, is 1 meter a low tide? Is 4 meter a high? Anyway, I thought I had it nailed. I thought I understood those numbers because I just always forget this stuff. And one day I walked down and then once again I got it wrong and it was a full high tide. And my dog, Boots, little cocker spaniel, looked up at me and she went, "Oh, for God's sake, does this mean I'm going to have to exercise in the freezing cold water? You're throwing the ball for me, so I've got to go swimming for my exercise." And I was like, "Yeah, sorry, Boots, you are." Anyways, I was just bored of getting it wrong again. So I opened up Jarvis and I said, "Jarvis, I've got this bloody annoying thing." And I explained the context that I've just explained to you. And I said, surely there's a way we can do this, right? Surely there's some data out there that we can get which talks about the actual live tide times. And surely if I give you a couple of times where the tides were good for a walk and the times were bad for a walk, you can triangulate all of that with the actual live tide data. And you can build me a little app that just says, go for a walk, right? It's good for a walk. And within 25 minutes, we'd built it on the beach, me talking to my phone. I had an app on my phone which my wife and I use every single day. And it tells us exactly when's a good time to go to the beach. I can put in a time and say, I want to go tonight at 4:00 or this afternoon at 4:00. What's it going to be? And, it's a very useful app. The thing about that, Omar, is it's only useful for Helena and me. Because I think everybody else who lives here, they know how to read tide times. They're all sailors, right? They get this stuff. So it sort of has shrunk, or the gap between what is possible and what's feasible has just completely collapsed. Because it was always possible to create that app. It was just never feasible. Like, it was a cost a couple of grand for me to pay a developer to build it. I was never going to do that. But instead, I can now do it in 20 minutes using my existing Jarvis setup, right? Which is basically already paid for in my monthly things. The point of telling you this is that sort of personal software is going to become easier and easier and easier to build. And I think that once you understand the patterns that exist or that need to exist in order for you to say, oh, I could build a solution for that. You can't unsee it. It's like the Matrix, man. Once you've seen it, you can't unsee the opportunity for AI to help you build stuff. Now, my app, it was built with AI, but it doesn't use AI. It's just software. It's old school deterministic software, pulling in data from AIs, analyzing it, giving me a nice little GUI. So, and I think that's the thing as well that people miss when they talk about AI changing the world. It's the fact that now we can all develop our own personal software. And if you apply that to work, you've worked in big organizations, as have I, right? You've sat there and you've said, IT, can you help me build this thing? Because I've got this problem. And it goes to the bottom of the queue and you wait and you wait and you wait and it never gets prioritized because there's always something bigger, understandably more important for the organization. So your thing, you just make workarounds. Well, guess what? If you know how to vibe code a solution, you can do that now. You can build your own workaround. Because you can build personal software. You can even build disposable software. So rather like, I talked to you before, I gave you that example about the artifacts, and you can say to Claude Code, go and give me this thing, put it in a pie chart. And then you go, oh, I don't like it. I'll make it a bar chart, right? That's disposable. That's software that's just disposed of straight away. You can build your own disposable software to help you with a simple task. I don't know what they would be off the top of my head because I'm not close enough to, people's work. Who are listening, but you can. I'm sure that people. Well, I hope people listening to this will go, "Shit, that means I could solve this problem." Now, you've got to be careful. You can't just, you've got to work with your IT team a little bit because what you don't want is your piece of software having read and write access to things it shouldn't have access to and leaking customer data and destroying your customer database or whatever it is. But the point is, the gap between what's possible and feasible has just collapsed. And I do think that people will start building their own.
Yes. Well, I don't know about that. So I guess we're definitely in second order effects territory now, because I guess we'll call this part what happens to the IT team. Because you're right, it is a frustration that you want your thing done and it's priority number one for you and your team, but maybe within the wider organization it isn't. And that's just part of being part of something bigger than yourself. Not everything is about you and your team, unfortunately. But in terms of us, the individual or the team members just going off and building these things themselves, we do still live in a world where we are incentivized to specialize in sales, as you've done throughout your career, specialize in writing and journalism, as I've done, and you just want to do the thing. This, believe it or not, this isn't the first podcast that I've produced in my career, and particularly you have to kind of do all this stuff that you'd rather not do in terms of, okay, I've got to find this software and I've got to do this scripting and I've got to do this and this. Wouldn't it be great to just be like Stephen Bartlett or someone and just kind of sit on your bum and talking to a microphone and then you go away and the whole team does things for you? Stephen Bartlett isn't thinking, oh great, I can just get rid of all these people and I can just kind of create AI agents can just do all this stuff for me. There's always going to be a limit to where people just want to specialize and be great at that thing. And I think you may be overstating how much people will actually be willing to become more of a generalist in order to do this. So I would think that it doesn't really, if the implication is that potentially all of this within organizations means the end of IT departments as we know them, because people are just going to do their own thing.
I don't think it means that. I don't think it means that.
Well, I think you might well get a different form of IT. So within a large organization, you might get, instead of a big company-wide team, you might get smaller central teams that manage the infrastructure and security. You have a smaller central team within the big organization with it that manages the infrastructure and security that can't be delegated, to your point before. But you have more of a distributed network sitting inside different teams. So an ops person who builds automated stuff with Claude, or an analyst who can write their own Python scripts, a marketer, that person who doesn't need to wait 2 weeks for a dashboard because they can just have someone sitting next to them who just does it. They don't need to call up IT to do that. How do you think IT will change?
Well, no, I think you're right. I think Look, you're still going to have your central enterprise level software and technology that needs supporting, because you are, right? You know, if you're a 2, 3, 10,000 person business with customers all over the world, you're going to still need your enterprise grade solution. And that is still going to need your developers, your ops people, you know, the people to keep it running, to keep it safe, to develop it, and all of that sort of stuff. And that is what IT do today. And that is generally why, if you've got your own little thing that you need fixing, you can't get it fixed, because they're always looking after that or upgrading that system, right? So they will still exist. What I'm saying, and I agree with you here entirely, is that teams will have people who naturally are more predisposed to do this. And I think maybe there'll even be new roles created. So if it's true that people won't just say, oh, do you know what, I'll vibe code my own solution, then what's likely is we'll end up where you've said, which is there will be experts within a team whose job it is to vibe code local solutions for those teams. I genuinely believe that. Like you said, an ops person who's building that, an analyst who's building it for analysts, a marketeer who's building the marketing agents or whatever. They don't even have to be agents, right? They could be software that does work on behalf of you that you would historically have wanted IT to make that they can't. And there's a guy called Howie Liu, right? He's the CEO of Airtable. And basically, Airtable, he was one of the original Salesforce guys, I think. And he left Salesforce to set up this business, Airtable. And it was a Salesforce Lite for smaller businesses, easy to use, more friendly, all that stuff. Anyway, last year, he basically saw the same thing coming that you and I have just been talking about personal software and people building that vibe coding their own agents. Problem is, vibe-coded agents are really dangerous if you don't know what you're doing. Vibe-coded software is really dangerous if you don't know what you're doing. He's pivoted his whole business to be away from being the sort of like the Salesforce wannabe, and is basically created this product called Hyper Agent, he's called it. Classic sort of grandiose name of Silicon Valley. But it's basically a way to get the magic of vibe coding without that sort of dangerous, sloppy stuff. And he's created this thing where you basically get the same agent power, but it's running in a like proper security stuff in sandboxes, production ready components, proper skills, governance, you know, one-click deployment. It's something that everybody can sort of no code, low code build. And his thing, it's enterprise grade infrastructure that you just give to your staff so they can build their own thing. And what he thinks is exactly what you're saying is he's saying that you will end up each team having their expert in building his sort of thing. So what he's trying to do is build another layer where rather than having to open up Claude Code and vibe coding a solution, you use his tools, which are sort of no-code, low-code stuff. So if you've ever come across things like Make.com and N8N, they were sort of early versions of this, but much more user-friendly versions of enterprise stuff. It's basically saying you can either vibe code your own in Claude Code or Codex or some tool, or you can use his software to do a no-code, low-code solution to agents or other software. And he's trying to make it so easy, a bit like, man, you might be a bit too young for this, but back in the day before Microsoft put the GUI that we all know and love today of Windows, you know, you had the DOS interfaces into the computers, right? And before we had mouse that would allow you to click on the GUI, it made computing really easy. He's basically trying to create that, but for the agentic and the software ecosystem and the world, which when you think about how Windows revolutionized how humans who historically would have gone nowhere near a computer suddenly became comfortable with using computers. Your worry that people aren't going to be T-shaped enough to be able to do this goes away because we all learn how to navigate a PC, right? We all learn how to open up Word and use Word. We all learn how to open up PowerPoint and move boxes around and make beautiful pictures. These are things that predecessors of our generation would have gone, what the hell are you doing? How can you use a computer for that? The future is what this guy is trying to build, which is that same sort of level of easy to use interface for personal software and agents, meaning that you don't even need to open up the terminal and bust out Claude Code to vibe code your own thing. Do you see where I'm going with that? Do you see where he's going?
Yes, but we started off this conversation by talking about how these SaaS companies became so successful because they created these user interfaces which were incredibly easy to use, and they were very seductive at locking you into the system. And what you've described there just sounds like another easy to use interface. Whereas I thought we were talking about Salesforce goes away potentially because people are just building their own stuff.
Yeah, the bit that we missed is why they would want to leave Salesforce. So they'd want to leave Salesforce and build their own stuff because it gets more and more expensive. So those 3 tolls that exist today, plus maybe a 4th if you had to pay for MCP access. Plus, historically, people have been seriously frustrated with all of their SaaS providers because if you wanted to build a new GUI or something bespoke for you, you'd have to go and spend $3,000 a day on a contractor who would spend ages building you this bespoke solution, right? It was really expensive to get it to work for you. Anybody who's worked with Salesforce knows the frustrations of it doesn't do what I want it to do. We have to build our own bespoke thing. So people were already getting frustrated. And if you layer on more costs on top of that, and the really important bit is you reduce the cost of taking your data and extracting yourself from Salesforce because you can now use your tech team can vibe code a solution much more quickly and securely than it would have taken before to take your data out of Salesforce. The barrier to leaving suddenly got lower. So what I was never saying was people were holding hand in hand with Salesforce dancing around the flower paddock. People weren't. People were pissed off, right? They paid for it because it was providing a service, but they were providing a service they were pissed off with because it was expensive and it was hard to use and it took so long, as in hard to use, as in hard to bespoke. Whereas, so they couldn't leave because it was too expensive to leave. Whereas now it's not so expensive to leave and there are alternatives. And what this guy is saying is rather than you having to vibe code your own interface, use his interfaces, which will plug on top and be much easier to use, much more bespoke. So all the things that used to piss you off about your old SaaS goes away with a much lower cost to exit and enter into the new world. Does that make sense?
Okay, I see. You mentioned a few times, but let's get into a bit more now. As another second order effect is the aspect of safety and security. So obviously, whether it's you trust a big software company or you have IT people helping you, there's always that element of, well, I could really bugger things up, right? So I need specialists to help me with whether it's hardware or software. So every time someone is vibe coding stuff, that is a new thing that needs to be made sure that it's safe and secure. So the more stuff you build, the more potential security risks there are. So if we're living in this world where people are creating more of their own stuff, how do we have an infrastructure where there's auditing going on to check the things that people have built without potentially even necessarily understanding how they built it?
Yeah, I think that is a great question. And it's what the people who counter that sort of Liu argument that I just made always say. And it's a fair one. But my view is there are ways around this. The first way around it is to say your IT team still control access. All right. So they can say, yes, I will give you an MCP connector access to the database that drives our whole business. But I'm not going to give you write access. I'm going to give you read access only, which means you can only pull data. You can't put anything back and risk destroying it. So you can put controls in centrally so that when people are vibe coding tools, because if you're vibe coding a solution that needs to access a database, you're going to need to create that pipe, whether it's an API or an MCP. And somebody centrally, like I talked about Salesforce could at the top, can control what actions you're allowed to take, what parts of the database you're allowed to access. And in doing so, you immediately restrict some idiot like me vibe coding an agent or a piece of software that accidentally wipes your database, because the actions required and the permissions required to do that disappear. Okay. I also think there's going to be a new role within the tech department, which is you could see a world where you could vibe code a solution and you could, before you're allowed to set it loose, you have to put it into a central repository. right? And somebody or their agent scans it for vulnerabilities, right? And they either fix it or they go back to you and say, you need to fix this because we found the following vulnerabilities before we're going to connect you up to the things that it could be vulnerable against. And in doing so, what you're keeping is a central database of all of the vibe-coded tools that exist in your business. So if somebody's created one that's actually not as good as one that already exists, the person or the agent could immediately say, you've just created something that already exists over here, go and use that. Do you see what I mean? So I think there are ways around this. And look, nobody's really building their businesses like this at the moment. These are new processes that will develop, that will bubble up. But I don't see any of them being completely insurmountable.
Yeah. And I again, going back to the previous discussion we had in a previous episode about how much job disruption there's really going to be from AI and the whole AI washing phenomenon that has happened at the stock market. I think just to zoom out as we head towards the end now and move on to verdicts, I think what is happening here, where you look at what's happened in the stock market since the beginning of the year, these kind of like big things are happening that are AI related that cause these huge swings in the stock market. And you describe very well what's happening with the SaaS companies. Anthropic, in terms of valuation, has overtaken OpenAI. These things are happening really quickly, and it gives you this feeling as a general person learning about the world that AI is making things happen really quickly. But everything you described very well in terms of how this could actually happen, where people build their own software and how organizations change around that, whether it comes to capability, whether it comes to security, and the education that needs to kind of like live, the training that needs to happen beyond that, for people to actually do this. That is all going to take time. And as that change happens, I just see all these different jobs being created. So to your point about different sorts of ops people, different sorts of IT people, different sorts of security people, Salesforce actually not kind of just dying because everyone hates them and wants something different, but actually changing, and these things take time, and actually developing a more nimble way of helping their clients use their software in more creative and bespoke ways. This could actually buy these companies, these big SaaS companies, the time to evolve in ways that actually suit the consumer. So I don't see this being goodbye for any of these things. I just feel that, again, as technology is changing, it is going to create opportunities, not just be the end.
100%. I mean, Stephen and I set up Agent Flow 9 months ago, with the goal of building agents for people. We've built agents for people, yes, but where we've spent most of our time is in that education space, right? Helping people come on the journey of what the hell is going on out there. So just last week, I was running 2 workshops with leadership teams on what AI is, how they can use it, and how they can learn the patterns in their business that can be supported by AI. And it's really interesting because people walked in and one person came up to me, and I won't mention who they were, but one person came up to me afterwards and said, I'm so pleased we did this session because I was so nervous. Because I was nervous about what I was going to learn, that AI was going to take all our jobs and it was going to be the end of the world. But actually, by doing this, what I've learned is not just the capabilities, but the constraints, the things it can't do. And that's given me huge confidence about where humanity can go. And I just think the more people understand and learn what AI can do, the more they'll hate it less, because they'll actually be able to understand how it can help them and how it's not going to take their jobs. But to do that, we need more opportunities for people to be educated and to learn this stuff. But it's moving so fast and people are so busy, they can't do it themselves. So I think there's going to be an army of people doing what we're doing, training people. And it's never going to end, right? You're going to have to keep keeping up with this stuff, which is fine for people like me, but also it's exciting, isn't it? I mean, I just get really excited when I think about that plugin that I talked about before, about the sales brief response plugin. I just get excited about how much more quickly a media sales team could respond to briefs. Because like agencies chuck them a brief at 10 in the morning and say, I want a response by 4 in the afternoon, sometimes on a WhatsApp. I'm not dissing the agency for that. It's just they're damn busy, right? But if you've got a plugin that can help you very quickly think through how that works, pull all the relevant data, help you do all the grunt work so that you just do the thinking and the creative part about what the pitch should be, your pitch responses are going to go through the roof in terms of quality. But nobody's doing that today because they don't understand it. And I just think there's new opportunities are going to pop up all over the place. And there's a different episode that we need to talk about in terms of your really interesting point you made there about the timeframes. Because everybody's talking about the fact that, which is nonsense anyway, AI is going to take every job by 2030, or whatever the stupid claims are about white collar knowledge work. For that to happen, people need to have perfect data today. They need to be perfectly informed as to what the capability is. They need to have the skills in their organization to shift from the current operating model to the next one. They have to be comfortable legally with the compliance issues that are bubbling up around all this. This is going to take years. The technology might be capable, but business takes time to move because, quite rightly, there are legal, ethical, compliance issues and human issues that you have to work through. That's going to take time, and that's going to give people the time to adapt to the things that are moving very, very quickly. Anyway.
Yeah. So believe it or not, goodbye Salesforce, goodbye Adobe.
Goodbye in today's shape and form, 100%. They'll just adapt and change. I just don't know what they'll adapt and change to, but there is a fight coming between the frontier models and those SaaS businesses. So not goodbye, but goodbye in the current form, definitely.
Yeah. I don't think the question is whether Salesforce and Adobe disappear. That's not going to happen anytime soon. But I think the right question is actually whether that, as you described, that logic that made people need them, even though they hated them, that whether that's weakening. It surely is. Like apps like you described it, your don't get drowned on the beach app, there's I think we've disagreed a lot about the extent to which that will actually normal people will actually do stuff like that, but I think there is something interesting happening where people are using AI to not create things which are AI, but just using AI to create kind of bespoke things which are just really helpful. I think there is something interesting happening when you cumulatively get potentially millions of people kind of solving their own problems using technology and what impact that's going to have. And that, I think, is going to be quite slow. I mean, when you compare it to moving from MS-DOS to Windows, and now people just use apps on iPhones, that, it has taken 40 years for that to happen. And it won't take 40 years for this transformation to happen, but it won't take 6 months. And it's enough time for incumbents to, sort their shit out and adapt. So again, with all these things at AI, the world isn't moving as quickly as some would like you to believe. Anyway, that is episode 6 of Believe It or Not. I have to call it a day, not just for this episode, but for our limited run of episodes of Believe It or Not, hosted by the Media Leader, and we thank them again for giving us a platform. And I hope you enjoyed it, listeners, on interrogating and investigating some of these grand claims about what's happening with AI, not just in media and advertising, but the wider world of business. If you've enjoyed it, please leave a review. Please write 1,000 words on LinkedIn or somewhere on social media saying why you love it. You can always email Hamish to send him your ideas for apps that he can build for you. He's at hamish@goagentflow.com. If you want to talk to me about anything else, I'm at omar@oomphumph.com. And thank you so much. And hopefully we'll be talking about more claims about AI and the business of media and advertising. Until then, thanks very much, Hamish.
Cheers, Omar.
And goodbye.